تکلیف در امور داخلی هیچ کشور دیگری رو نداره.
We move on now to the Americas, and Cuba is bracing for a deepening energy crisis after President Donald Trump moved to cut off Venezuelan oil supplies, a key lifeline for the island. According to reports, Venezuelan shipments have already slowed sharply, with no crude or fuel reaching Cuba for about a month. In 2025, Venezuela supplied roughly 1/3 of Cuba's daily oil limits. Energy experts warn the loss of Venezuelan fuel could push Cuba into a catastrophic situation, as the country already struggles with blackouts and shortages. While Havana has so far avoided the worst effects, rural areas are already living with limited electricity, fuel and basic services. The pressure now raises questions and concerns about how long Cuba's government can hold out as US pressure intensifies. Let's listen into what a Cuban resident, Victor Romero, had to say.
Es muy complejo porque sinceramente no se sabe cuál es la decisión que va a tomar el gobierno de Cuba y las acciones que va a tomar el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, que está poniendo unos puntos de presión sobre el gobierno y no se sabe en qué puede desencadenar eso. Ya vimos el ejemplo de Venezuela y no se sabe cuáles son las medidas que ellos puedan tomar con relación a la situación tan crítica que tiene este país en estos momentos.
Joining us now in this discussion is Raymond Vickery, an American attorney and former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Raymond. As always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Of course, the history between the United States and Cuba goes a very long way back, with Cuba, of course, an island just 90 miles off the Floridian coast. And the situation at the moment, Donald Trump, of course, has made some quite antagonizing statements about the island, standing on Air Force One alongside Lindsey Graham, of course, Graham calling for even a change of government in Cuba. However, the crisis for the people of Cuba in terms of energy, in terms of blackouts, of fuel shortages, remains rife throughout the country. How might this situation develop? Do you expect Donald Trump to act there? How much in American interests is Cuba in reality?
Well, thanks very much for having me. It seems to me that Cuba really is the object of the Trump administration in regard to its attempt to impose hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. As you know, our Secretary of State's parents were refugees from Cuba. Marco Rubio, the Secretary, has expressed great animosity toward Cuba and the Cuban regime. Under other administrations, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the presidents of the United States have recognized the sovereignty and have not invaded Cuba. There have been periods of thaw, but this is not the approach of the president, President Trump. His approach is the 19th century approach of trying to build an empire, if you will, in the Western Hemisphere. He sees things very much in 19th century terms. The United States having supposed rights to control the Western Hemisphere, and perhaps ceding Europe to Russia, Asia to China, the Middle East, Western Asia to Israel. The problem with this, of course, is that this is not a way to wage peace. There is no strategy to this, no partners, and the history of the 20th century has shown that these empires rub up against each other and lead to generalized war. Nevertheless, it is perfectly apparent that Marco Rubio, other advisors to President Trump who come from the Cuban American community, have a direct influence on President Trump, and this will be a part of his effort. He, of course, would like to be able to just conduct it like a real estate transaction and have the leaders of Cuba concede to him in terms of influence and ability to reap economic rewards from Cuba. But that's not really in the cards long run, and it is another indication of the short-term thinking of President Trump in regard to international affairs.
Raymond, the US embargo on Cuba started in 1960 and remains the longest trade embargo in modern history. The Biden era saw some limited rollbacks on family travel and remittances, but no formal normalization. That the two countries have no diplomatic ties, formal diplomatic ties whatsoever. Realistically, if you were to look at the situation now, what kind of threat does Cuba pose to the United States, and why is Donald Trump making such hawkish statements about the country?
I don't think it poses any strategic threat. The Soviet Union has gone away. Russia really doesn't have the ability to project power there. It's not a matter of strategic threat. It's not a matter of really even economic advantage. It's a matter of self-aggrandizement. It is a resurgent of the old way of thinking about greatness, whether it be individual greatness of President Trump or greatness of America, and that is to be able to control territory and people. Unfortunately, it's mirrored by Russia, saying if it can control the Ukraine. It's mirrored by China, saying if it can control Taiwan. This is the 19th century way of thinking, and really since time immemorial, whether it be Alexander the Great, Peter the Great, it is to control territory and people. So to think of this in ordinary terms, which have prevailed since World War II, when the international community tried to put together a system which got away from that view of greatness and territorial ambition, is fruitless, because that's not what's going on. And unfortunately, in the United States, it taps in to ancient roots, if you will, about manifest destiny, about Monroe Doctrine, about United States being paramount in the Western Hemisphere. So that's what's going on. It's a power measure as opposed to any really strategic or economic goal in mind.
And Raymond, there's clearly some talk there about action in Cuba. Just yesterday, for example, on Truth Social, Donald Trump responded to a social media post calling for Marco Rubio to become the president of Cuba. Donald Trump replied and said, "Sounds good to me." What more can you tell us about Marco Rubio's relationship stance on Cuba and his influence that might be held over Donald Trump when it comes to the approach with that country?
Well, Marco Rubio, of course, is primarily politically a representative initially of the Cuban American community in Florida. As I said, his parents fled Cuba. He was born in the United States, but his power base has been Southern Florida and Cuban Americans. And so that is where he comes from. That is visceral to him. And it's vital to the continued power of President Trump. He values Florida. He's really moved his residents there, and so he's beholden to the power base that Marco Rubio has created in some sense. That's not the only source. Of course, MAGA has adherents across the United States. But make no mistake about it, the Cuban American community, the whole mindset of southern Florida, after all, Marco Rubio was mayor of Miami, and his success was based on that community. So it's a political matter domestically, as well as a personal and national aggrandizement view from the President of the United States.
Raymond Vickery, as always, it's such a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us. We now move on, and a Canadian opposition lawmaker